They said he would never walk. Born crippled, Sundiata Keita was mocked by his peers and underestimated by enemies. Yet, in the dusty savannas of 13th century West Africa, where power came from strength and cunning, this boy would rise, not just to walk, but to reshape a region. This is where the story of the Mali Empire begins, not in triumph, but in exile. The land of the Mandinka people was fractured, scattered across small kingdoms and clans. Chief among these was the kingdom of Niani, ruled by Sundiata's father, Magan Khan Fata. Though he was a respected king, the looming threat came from the east, the kingdom of Sasso and its terrifying ruler, Samauro Kante. Samauro was said to command dark magic, and he swept across the land, toppling kingdoms like trees in a storm. When he invaded Niani, Sundiata, still a young boy, was forced to flee with his mother, Sagalin. Exile can break some spirits. But for Sundiata, it forged something deeper, resolve. Over years of wandering, he grew stronger, shedding weakness both of body and doubt. He studied the traditions of other peoples, built alliances, and earned a reputation as a leader of vision. While Samauro ruled with fear, Sundiata gathered strength in the margins, assembling warriors, clans, and even former enemies who had suffered under Sasso tyranny. The turning point came at the Battle of Karina in 1235. By then, Sundiata had become more than a prince, he was a symbol. Mounted on horseback, clad in armor, he led a coalition of kingdoms against Samauro's feared army. The clash was brutal, but decisive. Legends say Samauro vanished into the mountains after a mysterious arrow pierced his defenses. Whether myth or strategy, the Sasso menace collapsed that day. With the victory at Karina, Sundiata was no longer just a warrior, he became the Mansa, or emperor, of a new political entity. He convened the Kurukan Assembly, a grand council of clans and elders, to lay down the foundations of governance. Instead of brute domination, Sundiata offered a federation. Tribes retained customs but pledged loyalty to the new Mali Empire. This approach turned rivals into allies, stabilizing a region that had known only division. The Kurukan Fuga was remarkable not just for its timing, but its contents. It laid out rules for justice, land use, and even the treatment of women, centuries ahead of similar codes in other parts of the world. Oral historians, the griots, memorized and recited this charter, ensuring its survival even without ink and parchment. Trade routes, once choked by war, opened again. Gold, salt, ivory, and kola nuts flowed along caravan paths stretching from the forests of the south to the Sahara in the north. Sundiata positioned Mali as a middleman in trans-Saharan trade, and wealth trickled in like sand through a sieve, steady, plentiful, and golden. He chose Niani as his capital, a modest town that soon blossomed with courtyards, markets, and palaces. Travelers described its wide avenues and bustling stalls, where languages mixed and fortunes were made. Yet Sundiata himself remained a grounded leader. Unlike some later rulers who chased opulence, he was often described as measured, wise, and deeply rooted in Mandinka traditions. Still, the Mali Empire was not built in peace alone. Sundiata continued to secure his borders through military campaigns. He pushed westward toward the Senegal River, east toward the Niger, and deep into the forested south. His army was disciplined, well-fed, and loyal, thanks to the stability and prosperity his rule brought. Before his death, Sundiata had done more than avenge his exile. He had welded a mosaic of cultures into one of the greatest African empires. But he did not seek to be remembered as a god-king or a conqueror. Instead, his legacy was passed down through song, tales of a boy who learned to walk, then rose to carry a people. And the empire he forged? It was only just beginning to shine. After Sundiata's death, the Mali Empire stood as a strong but still young empire. It had solid bones, a confederation of tribes, a wise legal framework, and control over critical trade routes. But its true golden age had yet to begin. That task fell to his successors, particularly those of the Keita dynasty, who would expand, fortify, and enrich Mali until it dazzled both Africa and the wider world. The early successors understood what Sundiata had built and preserved the delicate balance between central authority and local autonomy. The empire was divided into provinces, each governed by a Farba, a royal appointee who reported directly to the Mansa. The Farba enforced imperial law, collected taxes, and maintained security, but local leaders still held sway over their own people. It was a flexible system, suited to Mali's cultural diversity and vast geography. One of the earliest to rise from this lineage was Mansa Uli, Sundiata's son. He was among the first West African rulers to make the pilgrimage to Mecca, decades before his more famous descendant Mansa Musa. This early Hajj helped strengthen ties with the Islamic world and confirmed that Mali's rulers were beginning to see themselves not just as African kings, but as global players in a vast Muslim network. With each generation, Mali's territory grew. Its military campaigns were strategic, targeting key river valleys, trade cities, and resource-rich regions. The empire's grasp eventually stretched from the Atlantic coast to parts of what is now Nigeria. Gold mines in Bambuk and Beret poured riches into Mali's coffers, while control over salt mines in Tagaza ensured Mali could command one of the most precious commodities of the ancient world. In the Sahara's scorching heat, salt was more than seasoning, it was life itself, used to preserve food and maintain health. Owning both gold and salt was like holding lightning in each hand. But conquest was not the empire's only engine. Diplomacy thrived under the Keita rulers. Marriage alliances, trade treaties, and cultural exchanges ensured stability where swords could not. Ambassadors from Mali appeared in the courts of North Africa, and Arab traders began to describe Mali in glowing terms. One traveler noted that the empire was so orderly that travelers could walk from one end to the other without fear of bandits, rare praise in the medieval world. The royal court grew more sophisticated. With wealth came artisans, poets, and scribes. The griots remained the keepers of oral tradition, but now they were joined by scholars who began to transcribe histories, genealogies, and Islamic texts. Architecture blossomed as well. While much of the construction was still done in sun-baked mud and wood, new styles influenced by North African and Andalusian designs began to appear in palaces and mosques. The Keita dynasty also promoted Islam while allowing local spiritual beliefs to continue. This dual religious landscape, one foot in African animism, one in Islam, allowed the empire to unify different peoples without forcing them into cultural submission. Friday prayers were observed, Quranic schools flourished, but festivals honoring local spirits and ancestors were still part of everyday life. Trade, the empire's lifeblood, surged to new heights. Caravans carried gold, kola nuts, and ivory northward, returning with salt, cloth, books, and ideas. Merchant towns like Jen and Gao thrived. Horses, metal goods, and even slaves were part of the exchange, though Mali's relationship with slavery was complex. Some were war captives, others sold into servitude, and some eventually gained freedom through loyal service. With growing prosperity came increasing complexity. Wealth attracted envy, and managing a vast empire with multiple cultures and languages required a careful hand. Some provinces began to act with more independence, testing the strength of the imperial center. Rebellions flared occasionally, but were usually crushed quickly, thanks to Mali's formidable army and the loyalty many still felt to the Keita legacy. By the time the 14th century arrived, Mali was no longer just a regional power. It was a force of legend, one whose influence radiated far beyond its borders. And at its heart remained the capital Niamey, humming with trade, echoing with griot songs, and guarded by generals loyal to the throne. But while these Mansas had grown the empire, it would take one extraordinary ruler to show the world just how golden Mali could truly be. His name was Musa. When Mansa Musa ascended to the throne in 1312, few outside West Africa had ever heard of Mali. Within 2 decades, however, the world would marvel at its wealth, scholars would debate its power, and cartographers would place a golden-crowned king atop Mali on their maps. It all began with a pilgrimage, one that would shake the medieval world. Musa wasn't born to rule. He came to power unexpectedly after his predecessor vanished during a mysterious expedition to explore the Atlantic Ocean. But Musa proved himself quickly, not just as a competent administrator, but as a visionary. And in 1324, he decided to fulfill a sacred duty, the Hajj, the pilgrimage to Mecca, required of every Muslim who could afford it. But this would be no humble journey. Accounts differ, but the numbers are staggering: a caravan of over 60,000 men, including soldiers, attendants, and officials. 12,000 slaves, each carrying a gold staff. Dozens of camels laden with hundreds of pounds of gold dust. Musa distributed gifts so generously along the way that in Cairo, the influx of gold caused inflation for over a decade. Gold lost its value because so much of it flooded the market. It was the kind of wealth that upended economies. But Musa's pilgrimage wasn't just about showing off. Along his route, he met with scholars, clerics, and leaders. In Cairo, he impressed the Mamluk Sultan's court with his intelligence, piety, and yes, his astonishing wealth. In Mecca and Medina, he funded mosques and schools. By the time he returned home, he had not only completed the Hajj, he had made Mali known to the entire Islamic world. And he didn't return empty-handed. Musa brought back architects, scholars, and books. One of them was the Andalusian architect al-Sahili, who is credited with helping design some of Mali's most iconic buildings, including the Jingarubber Mosque in Timbuktu, a structure that still stands today, built with sun-dried mud bricks and held together by centuries of tradition. Mansa Musa used his wealth to build a network of cities, Timbuktu, Gao, Jen, that became not just trade hubs but centers of learning. Libraries flourished. Schools taught not just religious doctrine but mathematics, astronomy, law, and philosophy. Manuscripts written in elegant Arabic script piled up in wooden chests, waiting to be read, copied, and passed down. At the heart of it all was Musa's vision, a Muslim empire rooted in African soil. He balanced Islamic principles with local traditions, promoting a tolerant society where different beliefs and customs could coexist. He funded the construction of countless mosques, including the Grand Mosque of Gao and many throughout the empire, yet never forced conversion. Faith was promoted, not imposed. Mali's reputation soared. Arab chroniclers wrote of a land so rich in gold it seemed mythical. European cartographers, hearing tales of Musa's journey, began to include him in their world maps. The 1375 Catalan Atlas famously depicts him seated on a throne, holding a nugget of gold, a caption beneath labeling him as the richest and most noble king of all. But this golden image masked the complexities at home. Musa's vast spending, while dazzling, stretched the empire's treasury. His expansion of learning and infrastructure required constant resources and loyal administrators. And though his military kept borders secure, managing such a wide empire remained a challenge. Still, during his reign, Mali reached the height of its power, prestige, and influence. Mansa Musa had transformed a regional empire into a global phenomenon. Trade boomed. Culture thrived. And Mali became a beacon of what African civilization could achieve: sophisticated, learned, wealthy, and proud. When Musa died, sometime around 1337, he left behind an empire like no other. But the golden glow that surrounded his reign would soon face darker skies. His successors struggled to maintain the splendor, and the empire's immense riches, once a source of pride, began to attract unwanted attention. Still, Musa's legacy endured, in the shimmering mosques, in the tens of thousands of manuscripts, and in the whispered tales of a king who once made the desert cities bloom with gold. In the wake of Mansa Musa's golden reign, Mali entered a new chapter, one where wealth still flowed, but the empire's heartbeat shifted from the royal court to the crossroads of commerce and scholarship. Nowhere captured this evolution more clearly than Timbuktu. To outsiders, Timbuktu seemed to rise like a mirage at the edge of the Sahara, a city of mud walls, spiked minarets, and treasure that wasn't gold but wisdom. Caravans arrived here after weeks of brutal travel, their camels caked in sand, their merchants driven by dreams of salt, ivory, and manuscripts. And in the bustling markets and shaded courtyards of this city, Africa's greatest minds gathered to teach, to debate, and to dream. By the mid-14th century, Timbuktu had become the intellectual heart of Mali, drawing students from as far as Cairo and Fez. The Sankore University, more a cluster of schools than a single building, offered instruction in theology, law, grammar, astronomy, and even medicine. Scholars copied texts by hand, carefully transcribing thousands of pages into bound volumes stored in private libraries. Manuscript collections grew like family heirlooms, precious, guarded, and passed down for generations. And it wasn't just Timbuktu. Cities like Jen and Gao became vibrant intellectual and commercial centers. Jen, in particular, was famous for its market, where goods from across Africa were traded, and its iconic mosque, rebuilt in the 20th century but modeled on earlier Mali Sahelian architecture. These cities were economic engines, powered by the empire's command over trade routes and the resources they controlled. Salt, extracted from Tagaza's sun-scorched pits, traveled south in enormous slabs, sometimes stacked on camels like tiles. Gold dust, collected in gourd-sized satchels, moved north. The Niger River served as Mali's internal highway, a watery thread connecting far-flung provinces and bringing with it not just goods but ideas. With every transaction came stories of distant lands, strange customs, and the changing tides of power. Mali's wealth was still staggering. Nobles wore imported silks. Horses were adorned with silver and brass. Even modest homes might boast copperware from the Mediterranean. But the empire's most prized currency became knowledge. Books, more than bullion, became symbols of power and prestige. Some merchants even traded entire caravans for rare manuscripts. Culturally, Mali had become a place of fusion. Islam shaped its laws, education, and rituals, but traditional Mande beliefs still pulsed underneath. Families honored both Allah and the spirits of their ancestors. Ceremonies were held under the new moon, where drumming, dancing, and praise songs from grots reminded listeners of their heritage. Rather than erase pre-Islamic traditions, Mali's rulers wove them into the empire's identity. This coexistence bred a rich artistic life. Woodcarving flourished. Metalworkers crafted amulets and ceremonial swords. Oral epics grew longer, more intricate, with grots preserving lineages, battles, and cautionary tales. The story of Sundiata, already legend, was told with new flair, tying each generation back to its founding hero. Yet all this brilliance cast long shadows. The empire, now massive, had grown difficult to manage. Corruption began to seep into local administrations. Some Farba, left unchecked, ruled like little kings. Succession disputes at the top led to brief, turbulent reigns, with rival claimants weakening central authority. A few tried to emulate Musa's glory, but without his vision, or his discipline. Outside Mali's borders, change brewed. The Songhai, once subjects of Mali, began to grow more assertive. To the north, Berber traders and warriors eyed Mali's riches with renewed interest. And while Islamic scholars praised Mali's learning, some criticized the empire's tolerance of pagan customs, questioning its piety. But within the empire's cities, life continued, vibrant, noisy, and full of hope. Children recited verses at Quranic schools. Markets buzzed with haggling voices. And in quiet chambers, scholars pored over worn scrolls, unaware that they were preserving some of the world's most precious knowledge for centuries to come. As the sun set over Timbuktu's mud-brick skyline, casting long shadows on the desert floor, it was easy to believe that Mali's brilliance would last forever. But history, like the shifting sands, rarely stays still for long. The sun that had risen so brightly over Mali's golden age began to cast longer shadows in the late 14th and early 15th centuries. Though the empire still glistened with wealth and retained global fame, its foundations had started to crack. Power struggles, regional ambitions, and external threats combined to loosen the threads that once bound Mali together. After Mansa Musa's death, no successor quite measured up to his blend of vision, authority, and charisma. His immediate heir, Mansa Magan, inherited the throne but lacked his father's foresight. Though Mali remained wealthy, poor leadership and internal squabbles began to corrode the smooth functioning of the empire. One of the key issues was succession itself. Unlike a rigid system of primogeniture, Mali's succession allowed for multiple claimants, sons, brothers, nephews, all of whom could be considered legitimate. While this provided flexibility, it also invited conflict. Rival princes formed factions, sometimes supported by military commanders or influential regional governors. Palaces that once rang with praise songs and council meetings began to echo with whispers of betrayal. Some Mansas reigned only for a few years, or months, before being deposed. Others ruled from the safety of their court, disconnected from the realities of the empire. Farba, once loyal administrators, saw opportunities in this chaos. Many acted independently, taxing trade routes for their own profit or forging alliances with powerful merchant clans. The delicate balance between central rule and local autonomy tilted dangerously. Beyond Mali's borders, former vassals began to test their strength. Chief among them were the Songhai people, centered in Gao. Originally absorbed by Mali during Sundiata's and Musa's expansions, the Songhai had grown wealthy themselves through trade and were watching carefully. Under leaders like Sunni Ali, they began to push back, recapturing territory and disrupting trade routes vital to Mali's economy. Meanwhile, in the north, Berber raiders from the desert were becoming bolder. Drawn by tales of gold and weakened border defenses, they launched incursions into Mali's northern territories. Tagaza, the vital salt mining hub, became increasingly vulnerable. Salt convoys now needed heavier military escorts, straining both manpower and morale. Internally, some regions with strong Islamic influence grew restless with the empire's tolerance of traditional practices. They wanted stricter religious leadership, more aligned with reformist trends spreading from North Africa. Others, particularly in the empire's southern forests, resisted central rule altogether, preferring their own animist customs. Unity, once Mali's strength, was fraying. Trade began to shift. As maritime powers like Portugal explored the Atlantic coast, the trans-Saharan routes that Mali had dominated for centuries started to lose their primacy. New ports emerged along the West African coast, drawing gold and ivory away from the inland empire. Mali, once the heart of commerce, began to look more like a relic of a fading era. One by one, key cities slipped from Mali's grasp. Gao, Timbuktu, and Jen, all glittering jewels in the empire's crown, were either contested or lost entirely. Timbuktu, once the empire's proud center of learning, fell under the sway of Songhai control, though its libraries and scholars continued to shine even under new rule. The people of Mali, especially those in rural regions, felt the slow unraveling in different ways. Some were taxed more heavily, others caught in battles between rival factions. Griots who had once sung the praises of Mansas now spoke more often of betrayal, lost glory, and uncertain futures. And while the empire never collapsed overnight, it became a place where power was constantly negotiated, and certainty was rare. Despite the decline, the empire lingered, smaller, less influential, but still culturally alive. Smaller kingdoms and principalities emerged in its place, sometimes ruling in the name of Mali, other times against it. The legacy of centuries of greatness could not be erased so easily. But the Mali of Sundiata and Musa, the empire that had dazzled Cairo, defied the Sahara, and built libraries and mud-brick mosques, was gone. In its place stood a memory, powerful and persistent, waiting to be rediscovered in songs, scrolls, and the red dust of the Sahel. The fall of the Mali Empire was not a single dramatic event, but a long, slow fading, like embers cooling after a brilliant blaze. By the end of the 16th century, what had once been one of the world's richest empires was a fragmented collection of territories, many ruled by warlords or absorbed into rising powers like Songhai. But the story of Mali did not end with its decline. It simply changed form. In the centuries that followed, the name Mali would still carry weight. It echoed in the oral histories passed down by griots, in the records of Arab historians, and even in the whispers of European explorers who arrived in West Africa centuries later. Though the empire's political dominance faded, its cultural and intellectual legacy endured. Take Timbuktu, for example. Even after falling under Songhai control and later Moroccan invasion, the city retained its identity as a center of learning. Its libraries, some hidden in underground vaults, survived war, weather, and time. Thousands of manuscripts, written in Arabic and Ajami, African languages using Arabic script, covered everything from theology and law to astronomy and poetry. These scrolls stood as a testament to an era when West Africa was not just rich in gold but steeped in thought. The griots, too, continued their work. They told the stories of Sundiata's exile and return, of Mansa Musa's pilgrimage, of cities that rose in the desert, and of kings who held court beneath baobab trees. In a region where writing was precious and rare, memory became the archive, and song the database. Through rhythm and repetition, they preserved identity. Even in modern times, Mali's legacy shaped African consciousness. When French colonizers arrived in the 19th century, they often dismissed African civilizations as primitive or backward, failing to grasp that beneath their feet lay the ruins of once great cities, kingdoms, and cultures. After independence in 1960, the new nation of Mali chose its name with purpose, reaching back to that medieval empire as a symbol of pride and possibility. Today, visitors to Mali can still see the great Mosque of Djen, reconstructed in the early 1900s but rooted in ancient design. They can travel to Niani's remains, where stones hint at the capital Sundiata once chose. They can walk the alleyways of Timbuktu, where children still study by candlelight in schools that trace their lineage to Sankor. But Mali's influence isn't limited to ruins and relics. It lives on in music that blends old rhythms with new instruments, in proverbs and folktales that teach humility, strength, and wisdom, in the idea, still powerful, that Africa was not always a continent in crisis, but once a continent of empires. Even the broader world began to take note. In the 21st century, historians, archaeologists, and digital archivists have worked to preserve Mali's manuscripts, digitizing them and protecting them from conflict and decay. Documentaries and books highlight the empire's importance, correcting centuries of erasure. And while Mali no longer commands trade routes or global headlines, its story has regained momentum, not through gold or conquest, but through memory, curiosity, and pride. It reminds us that history isn't just what's written on monuments or in textbooks. Sometimes it's what endures in the stories we tell. So the Mali Empire, in truth, never completely disappeared. It changed forms, slipped into song and story, and waited for the world to remember. And now, perhaps, we are beginning to listen again.